душу. И я одна, моя жизнь без тебя, словно солнце без тепла. Моя жизнь так пуста, ты ушел, и я одна. Без тебя моя жизнь, словно темная печаль. Ты мой свет на земле, я люблю тебя навек.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Miss Sim Universe 2017. This is the national costume show with all of you. Lucca Vandhi, Miss Sim Universe 2016.
Hi everyone. It's a pleasure for me to be here with all of you in this amazing and magical place. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming to our show. I'm Lucca Vandhi, Miss Sim Universe 2016. Tonight, we will see the beautiful candidates parading in their amazing national costumes. Let's start. Let's start with Miss Afghanistan. It symbolizes the beauty of the Arab woman with a typical costume of belly dance dancer. The violet color is in reference to the feminist struggle. Thanks, Miss Afghanistan. Next up, Miss Argentina. Between shines and feathers, this garment represents the god Inti, who, according to Argentine myths and legends, created the universe. Awesome, Miss Argentina. Next up, Miss Australia. Sydney, bright like a diamond, representing Sydney, the biggest city of Australia. The elegant and cosmopolitan Sydney is a city that never sleeps. Sydney is famous for its cultural impact, nightlife and economical potential. Next up, Miss Austria. Crafted with the same material as a trademark as the city of Eva in the city of Carinthia, one of the most inhabited in this country of Austria. Thanks, Miss Austria. Next up, Miss Azerbaijan. This is a modernly interpreted version of kina dresses in Azerbaijan. Kina is a traditional event right before the wedding. It represents that the girl is flying away from her home. These gold sparkles shows how rich she is, and red is a must for the kina night. Next up, Miss Barbados. Traditional Barbadian festival costume. Pinky and white color represents the joy and happiness. This dress also have a very important meaning for the contestant Cherise, because this is the dress that her mother wore when she was very young. Thank you, Miss Barbados. Next up, Miss Belgium. Thanks, Miss Belgium. Next up, Miss Bolivia. Huirukcha God. It's a divinity of the sky that encompasses the Andean idea of a general god, the creator. He is considered the most prominent among the Andean gods, and its figure is the central one of the sun gate of Tiwanaku. Next up, Miss Bosnia and Herzegovina. Wearing a traditional wedding dress in her hometown, the girl welcomed the future groom and her parents in her home, adorned also by white flowers, a symbol of purity and perfume after a bath in lavender oil. The presentation was crucial to make the girl look like the right woman for the guy she chooses. Next up, Miss Brazil. This national costume is about the biggest event from Paris, the Queen of Queens. All girls from Paris state compete in a prestigious event that held in Carnival. Thank you, Miss Brazil. Next up, Miss Brunei. Wearing a typical dress called kebaya, and together with refined and beautifully detailed and designed fabrics, captures the cultural identity of her country. Her headdress with diamonds was inspired by the natives of Borneo and represents not only the cultural richness but also the glorious history and wealth of Brunei. The white lilies on the head shall symbolize the lush rainforests of Brunei and the tropical climate of the nation. Thank you, Miss Brunei. Next up, Mississippi, Canada. It's inspired by the different traditions of the country, like the Calgary Stampede, which is one of the most beautiful traditions of Canada, and many more. Thank you, Mississippi, Canada. Next up, Miss Chile, named Santiago on Fire. This national costume represents the Santiago Parade. Thank you, Miss Chile. Next up, Miss China, inspired by one of the most popular legends of the Asian giant, dragons and historians, the reason why people worshipped the dragon in ancient China. The association of the Chinese monarch with the dragon began during the Qin dynasty. Thank you, Miss China. Next up, Miss Cook Islands, named the soul of the island. Typical dress in the women of Cook Islands is the traditional dress. Thank you, Miss Cook Islands. Next up, Miss Costa Rica. Thank you, Miss Costa Rica. Next up, Miss Cuba. Wearing a costume that represents the heat and the Cuban sea, the lines are taken from the traditional skirts of the Cuban dancers who are dancing in the local conga to entertain the public at party. The top instead recalls the one worn by cha-cha-cha dancers, a mix that comes back in the Cuban hinterland. Thank you, Miss Cuba. Next up, Miss Curacao. Thank you, Miss Curacao. Next up, Miss Cyprus, named the birth of Aphrodite. Aphrodite is the Cypriot Greek goddess of love, sex, and beauty, usually said to have been born near her chief center of worship, Paphos, on the island of Cyprus. Thank you, Miss Cyprus. Next up, Miss Democratic Republic of Congo. Inspired by one of the more than 450 ethnic groups established in the large territory, the Mangatuazan, the costume consists of a handmade jug made by this culture, a plume with horns symbolizing the birds of the Congo, a satin dress with typical decoration, tribal makeup and a necklace that covers the whole neck, and symbolizes beauty and fertility of the Congolese woman. Thank you, Miss Congo. Next up, Miss Egypt. Thank you, Miss Egypt. Next up, Miss Fiji. Thank you, Miss Fiji. Next up, Miss Finland, the Ice Queen. Finland is named for a cold temperature and Miss Finland is wearing as Ice Queen, remembered frozen. Thank you, Miss Finland. Next up, Miss France. All the glamour of the Parisian cabarets, like Moulin Rouge or Folie Burger, are represented in this sensual outfit. So sexy. Thank you, Miss France. Next up, Miss Gabon. You look marvelous, Miss Gabon. Thank you. Next up, Miss Georgia. Usually worn by Queen in Georgia, arcalic made by various kinds of fabric, such as silk, satin, cloth, cashmere and velvet. The dress meaning about greatness, elegance and authority to the people. Thank you, Miss Georgia. Next up, Miss Germany. Thank you, Miss Germany. Next up, Miss Ghana. Inspired in the traditional clothes of the women from the country with details in blue, yellow, red and green. Thank you, Miss Ghana. Next up, Miss Great Britain. Inspired by the Queen Victoria I, this woman represents the splendor and golden age of Great Britain, who is without doubt one of the most important characters of that country. Thank you, Miss Great Britain. Next up, Miss Greece, named Zodiacos, inspired by the ancient Greece and golden colors sung with the trajectory of the sun. Thank you, Miss Greece. Next up, Miss Haiti, called the Golden Hope, worked entirely by hand, is inspired by the strength of the Haitian people in the face of catastrophes. Gold reflects the purity and greatness of the heart. It carries a sun-shaped back because every catastrophe is the storms that hide the sun, but the later is the one that always illuminates, gives light and life. Thank you, Miss Haiti. Next up, Miss India. Lord Murugan, the son of Shiva and Parvati, is a much revered deity of Hindus, especially in South India. Murugan rides a peacock and wields a bow in battle. During his bachelorhood, Lord Murugan is also regarded as bachelor god. Thank you, Miss India. Next up, Miss Indonesia. Thank you, Miss Indonesia. Next up, Miss Iran. Bird Phoenix, mystic and powerful, represents the rise of the bird phoenix, inspired by the mysticism and beliefs, which was one of the most important cultures of antiquity. Thank you, Miss Iran. Next up, Miss Ireland. The costume represents the fairies of Ireland, the magical and wonderful creatures who lives on the forest. Irish fairies are the most beautiful and powerful ones. Thank you, Miss Ireland. Next up, Miss Israel. Thank you, Miss Israel. Next up, Miss Italy. Thank you, Miss Italy. Next up, Miss Jamaica. Thank you, Miss Jamaica. Next up, Miss Japan. Japan is a worldwide meme for the anime, and Miss Japan wears a dress remind about the animes like Sailor Moon, Sakura Card Captor and others. Thank you, Miss Japan. Next up, Miss Kenya. Thank you, Miss Kenya. Next up, Miss Korea. Hanbok used by queens on special occasions, traditionally considered as a clothing used for celebrations. The colors have a great meaning since this has distinguished the royalty. Thanks, Miss Korea. Next up, Miss Kosovo. Thank you, Miss Kosovo. Next up, Miss Kuwait. Cobra Tower. The costume is a very symbolic structure in Kuwait, since it was the first spiral tower for the world. Thank you, Miss Kuwait. Welcome, Miss Lesotho. Thank you, Miss Lesotho. Next up, Miss Liechtenstein. To her home country and the Alpine region, her dress represents the colors of her country's nature, which are water of the rivers, green of the mountains and forest, and white of the mountains' snowy summits. Her back piece shows Liechtenstein's capital, Vaduz, and shows the breathtaking nature of her country. The picture is framed by a red and blue banner, the national colors of her flag, and topped off with the crown of Liechtenstein, which can be found on the national flag as well. Next, UP. Miss Lithuania. Dressing a traditional wedding dress. Gorgeous Miss Lithuania. Next up, Luxembourg. Thank you, Miss Luxembourg. Next up, Miss Malaysia, representing the hornbill bird which exists in Sarawak, Borneo. The headgear symbolizes the Kenyan bird, and the gold details on the costume represent their rich culture. Meanwhile, the fabric on the clothes symbolizes the Ibonese and Dayak Borneo weave which existed since 1,000 years ago from our tradition on behalf of our great-grandmother. Amazing Miss Malaysia. Give the welcome to Miss Mauritania. Thank you, Miss Mauritania. Next up, Miss Mauritius. Representing the Carnival of Mauritius, an amazing parade that received millions of people from all parts of the world to celebrate. Amazing Miss Mauritius. Give the welcome to Miss Mexico, inspired in Xochitl, goddess of the beauty and flowers, lover of the divinity. She is the divinized lover, goddess eminently feminine. Her realm, love, voluptuousness, sensuality, sexual desire and pleasure in general. Thank you, Miss Mexico. Next up, Miss Namibia. Called Namibian colored dress. This is a national costume from Namibia, colorful, long and with a ponytail. Thank you, Miss Namibia. Next up, Miss Nicaragua, titled The Definitive Poet of the Language. After the Golden Age, Rubén Darío represents the father of the Castilian letters and the modernism, that with its works inspired to the whole world to have the habit of reading and poetry, internationally recognized for his works. 100% Nicaraguan and pride of that country. Beautiful Miss Nicaragua. Next up, Miss Northern Ireland, titled Dancing Irish. The costume represents all the dancers of the traditional Irish dance. Thanks, Miss Northern Ireland. Next up, Miss Norway. Thank you so much, Miss Norway. Next up, Miss Panama. Thank you so much, Miss Panama. Next up, Miss Paraguay. Thank you, Miss Paraguay. Next up, Miss Philippines. Beautiful Miss Philippines. Next up, Miss Poland, representing the region of Dolnotsky and is inspired by the polka folk dance that gives it cultural identity and ancestral heritage, is traditionally used in festivals throughout the country and is a benchmark of Poland at the international level. The suit consists of a black embroidered hood, light long-sleeve blouse with a gold waistcoat, embroidered in silver and gold thread, has a band with the flowers characteristic of Polish embroidery to enhance the figure in a black fitted. Thanks, Miss Poland. Next up, Miss Portugal, showing the power colors from Portugal's flag. The colors is about the Portugal history. Green is hope from Portuguese people and red is about blood from the people who died serving for their nation. Thanks, Miss Portugal. Next up, Miss Romania, inspired in ethnic fashion with Romanian handicraft and Romania's ancient peasant traditions. The chiffon-lined woman's suit is covered in tufts of wood which evoke a Transylvanian roof and a figure-hugging dress embroidered. Thank you, Miss Romania. Give the welcome to Miss Russia. The matryoshka, a female name which comes from mother, is also the symbol of Russia. The big doll represents Russia Mother, and in itself she hosts children, women, men, but also feelings like pain, happiness, joy. It is a mother who can host all these things. It's beautiful. Thanks, Miss Russia. Next up, Miss St. Vincent and the Grenadines, called the Goddess of the Night. This costume represents the nightlife of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. The old Timish gown shows the history of the island's ancestors. Amazing. Thanks, Miss St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Next up, Miss Scotland, the Royal Unicorn, associated with royalty and heraldry since at least the time of the Romans, and over the centuries their appearance and personality traits. They grew to become an exotic creature. In Celtic mythology, the unicorn of Scotland symbolized innocence and purity, healing powers, joy, and even life itself. This costume can be seen as a symbol of power, kindness, and beauty. Awesome. Thanks, Miss Scotland. Next up, Miss Slovenia. Thanks, Miss Slovenia. Next up, Miss South Africa. Thanks, Miss South Africa. Next up, Miss South Sudan. Thanks, Miss South Sudan. Next up, Miss Spain. The representation of the Spanish woman by the painter Julio Romero is the inspiration of this costume, so Andalusian and colorful. Wonderful Miss Spain. The welcome to Miss Sri Lanka, called Queen of Ceylon, inspired by the cultural diversity of the island and the country's majority religion, Buddhism. Her beautiful golden back piece is inspired by various Buddhist statues, and her gem-studded headdress not only hints at their colonial history and once important area of trade in the region, but also symbolizes the many riches this beautiful island has to offer. Thanks, Miss Sri Lanka. Give the welcome to Miss Suriname. Thanks, Miss Suriname. Give the welcome to Miss Switzerland. Refers to the Swiss Alps, an area that occupies most of the Swiss territory, approximately 62.5% of the country. Much of this vast alpine space cannot be exploited, even extensively, but the Alps serve, above all, as a leisure and recreation space, becoming one of the most representative attractions of Switzerland. You look marvelous, Miss Switzerland. Give the welcome to Miss Thailand, inspired by an organic sea, white belly, which is a sculpture in the center of Krabi, which represents vision, foresight, width, as the word that flies. Thank you, Miss Thailand. Next up, Miss Tonga, representing the native turtle from the Kingdom of Tonga. The dress represents the sea, Thanks Miss Tonga. Next up, Miss Trinidad and Tobago, called bright nature of Trinidad and Tobago. Trinidad and Tobago has a vast nature existence. These bright colors such as pink, blue and purple represent the flora of the Twin Island Republic. Thanks Miss Trinidad and Tobago. Next up, Miss Turkey, called the soul of belly dancer. The inspiration of that costume is coming from Ottoman Empire. Women all around the world were abducting and forcing to seduce sultans. They were dancing with these kind of costumes to seduce them. This represents their pure soul and also their evil side. The evil side they become because of how they treat it. Thanks Miss Turkey. Next up, Miss Ukraine, called Flourish in Ukraine. Despite the difficult situation that our country is going through in various areas, we see our country, as we see it in our dreams, with flowers, rich and prosperous. This reflects my national costume, the hope of seeing my country flourish, leaving the problems and differences behind. Thanks Miss Ukraine. Next up, Miss USA, representing the most famous doll in the world, Barbie. Thanks USA. Next up, Miss Venezuela. Miss Venezuela show us a national costume inspired in the Scarabæus, a national bird. Thank you, Miss Venezuela. Next up, Miss Vietnam. Thanks Miss Vietnam. And the last but not the least, Miss Zimbabwe. Thanks Miss Zimbabwe. Amazing, don't you think? I'm so in love for all this beautiful costumes. I want to thank to all of you for watching us. Do you have your top 16? Who's your favorite? For now it's all for me, but we will return with the final show this November. I'm Lucca Vandhi. See you soon.